place, the House Ways and Means Committee. If you want to go for more, you can turn there now and look at it. Also go to cspan.org. You can listen to it on C-SPAN radio as well. It hasn't started yet. People are milling about. But for now, we'll leave that as we take you to the House of Representatives.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. Loving and gracious God, we give you thanks for giving us another day. Help us this day to draw closer to you, so that with your Spirit and aware of your presence among us, we may all face the tasks of this day. Bless the members of the People's House. Help them to think clearly, speak confidently, and act courageously in the belief that all noble service is based upon patience, truth, and love. May these decisive days through which we are living make them genuine enough to maintain their integrity, great enough to be humble, and good enough to keep their faith, always regarding public office as a sacred trust. Give them the wisdom and the courage to fail not their fellow citizens nor you. May all that is done this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the Journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the Journal stands approved. Pledge of Allegiance will be led today by the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 5 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, in a hearing before the House Armed Services Committee on April 25th, I asked the Secretary of the Army, John McHugh, if he could give me an idea of what the excess capacity is for Army installations in the United States. The Secretary informed me that the last study was done in 2004 and found that the excess capacity was at 20%. He stated that the amount would probably be much higher today, but that he had no way of knowing since Congress had prohibited him from using any funds to study the issue further. Mr. Speaker, I will move an amendment when the National Defense Authorization Act comes to the House floor that will direct the Secretary of Defense to determine what the current excess capacity is so that we will know the potential savings from doing another base realignment and closure commission. I support the administration in their call for another base realignment closure commission in 2015. Every dollar wasted in the defense budget is a dollar that is not spent on defending our nation. I ask that my colleagues in the House support my amendment when it comes to the floor. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise? Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the folks in my district in Georgia who are witnessing a series of serious missteps in the federal government, giving rise to an unprecedented level of distrust in government. This week, we learned that the Internal Revenue Service used inappropriate criteria to delay or stall conservative organizations applying for tax-exempt status. This is a totally unacceptable abuse of power the IRS has in our government and calls into question any future decisions made by that agency. Trust in the federal government is already at an all-time low. To help regain any of that trust, it's essential that all personnel involved in this misuse of power be held accountable. We've got serious work to do in Congress, but this sort of trouble only takes time and attention away from the work we need to do. I urge my colleagues to investigate this matter swiftly and get on with the work we've been sent here to do, and I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. For what purpose does the gentle lady from Indiana rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor the service and sacrifice of our nation's police officers. This week is Police Week, and I urge all Americans to take time and thank the men and women who keep us safe and reflect on the heroes we've lost in the line of duty. I'm continually impressed and humbled by the devoted efforts of law enforcement officers in our communities. From tracking down criminals and conducting safety programs for our kids, our law enforcement officers work around the clock, routinely putting themselves in harm's way to keep us safe. Sometimes officers make the ultimate sacrifice, leaving behind grieving loved ones and communities in mourning. At times like these, there are no words that adequately express the gratitude that we owe to our law enforcement. To all our police officers, our nation is grateful for your bravery, integrity, and indebted to your public service. I yield back the balance of my time.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, we who serve too often overlook the hard work and dedication of those who serve with us, the members of our staff. Today I rise to recognize the dedication of Jack Pratt. Jack is my Chief of Staff. Today he departs for new responsibilities. I hired him on my very first day in Congress 12 years ago when he rose through the ranks. More than almost anyone I know, I have depended on Jack in good times and bad, through thick and thin. Now with a new baby in his life, he opens up a new chapter of his life. I wish him well, and his wife, Kristen, and 2 kids, Callie and William. Thank you, Jack Pratt, my Chief of Staff and my friend, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Time of the gentleman has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the House passed the 37th piece of legislation that replaces, repeals, or defunds the government health care takeover bill. House Republicans warned the American people that the legislation's effect would be devastating to patients, to health care providers, and small businesses, destroying jobs. In recent weeks, there has been bipartisan recognition of the failure of the government health care takeover. Senator Max Baucus has warned that Obamacare's implementation will be a train wreck. Sadly, thousands of new IRS agents who deny free speech will now control health care. The good news, there's still time for repeal. The House is acting in the best interest of American families. It's my hope the Senate will consider our efforts and pass legislation before it's too late. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we will never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism. Congratulations, Candace Glover of St. Helena Island, South Carolina, for being the newest queen of American Idol.
Time of the gentleman has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise? Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to talk about the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope. This is an exciting, unique, public-private science project that is being developed in cooperation with the National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy's Office of Science, and a number of small companies. The idea behind the LSST is very simple. Take pictures of the entire southern sky and measure everything that moves or changes brightness. And after 10 years of operation, the LSST will allow us to catalog billions of stars, galaxies, and other interstellar objects. This database will address the most pressing questions in astronomy, physics, from potentially hazardous asteroids to the mysteries of dark matter and dark energy. The development of the LSST will push boundaries of big science and computing. I urge my colleagues to join me in recognizing the importance of public-private partnerships and their role in studying science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Support for these projects is critical. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for the folks in my district being furloughed because of indecision, political gamesmanship, and the failure to act in Washington. Our nation has no greater asset than the folks serving our nation, including those who make up our Department of Defense, both military and civilian alike. Their dedication and service to our nation is unwavering. Unfortunately, those same patriots have lived for months with the uncertainty of the sequester. Many of those who have dedicated themselves to ensuring equipment is repaired and ready for our armed forces are being forced to step away from their lines. Even the children of our military families will not be spared. Teachers at DoD schools are being furloughed too. The administration had flexibility to make other choices. Furloughs are just one of the effects of compounding budget cuts on our nation's military, and it affects this nation's military readiness. There are smarter solutions to our nation's budget woes, and I voted for replacements for this short-sighted sequester. Congress should not sit idly by. Let's fix this. Mr. Speaker, with that, I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute. Revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. The student loan debt is a crisis in this country, Mr. Speaker. More and more students approach me in the district and post on my Facebook about their loan debt. I'd like to share an excerpt from the stories for those of my colleagues who may not fully appreciate why it's so critical that we provide our students and families with relief. Sharon Lawless says this: "Please, Congressman Tierney, we need you and your colleagues to get to the crux of the student loan debt ASAP. Many students end up paying double or triple what they actually borrowed to go to college. This is an outrage and seems out of sync with the original mission of the student loan program. People want to pay back fairly what they borrowed, but the system actually seems rigged to make that impossible." Earlier this week, it was reported that the federal government will earn $51 billion profit from student loan borrowers this year, which exceeds the earnings of the nation's most profitable companies and is roughly equal to the combined net income of the 4 largest U.S. banks by assets. It's time we stopped using the federal student loan program as a profit center for the government. We need to pass legislation that stops the doubling of the student loan interest rate by July 1 and turn our attention to the long-term solution that will help new borrowers as well as the estimated 37 million Americans that have existing student loan debt. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, it has been 2 bad weeks for the White House. Benghazi cover-ups by the State Department officials, massive intrusion into phone records by the Justice Department, and the forced resignation of acting IRS Commissioner Stephen Miller and another top official, Joseph Grant, after one of the most unbelievable abuses of government power in recent years. After the IRS admitted to targeting conservative groups with those messages it disagrees, the American people were shocked by this politically motivated discrimination. No matter what party controls the White House, taxpayers deserve to be treated fairly. President Obama promised an open and transparent government, yet these government lies show a complete disregard for the Constitution. In fact, the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause requires that the government treat all entities in a similar, fair, and equal manner. Let me be clear, no administration should ever use the IRS to target its political opponent. No way, no how. I will demand the administration be held accountable for this outrage. This is the United States of America, Mr. Obama, not one of your European buddies. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida rise? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, it's now been 866 days since I arrived at Congress, and the Republican leadership has still not allowed a single vote on serious legislation to address our unemployment crisis. That's 0 votes to address our nation's most pressing emergency. That's 0 votes to address the sequester policies that are making our job crisis immeasurably worse. Yet, yesterday, the Republican Congress took its 37th vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Mr. Speaker, this was not only a colossal waste of valuable time that could have been spent focusing on jobs legislation, it's a further step in the wrong direction. By expanding access to health care, the Affordable Care Act gives Americans more disposable income, creating more customers for our businesses, and in turn, more jobs. It's time to bring the American Jobs Act to the floor. It deserves a vote. Investigate Benghazi. Investigate the AP leaks. Investigate the IRS. But, Mr. Speaker, don't forget our focus, our crisis, our mantra should be jobs, jobs, jobs.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. By the direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 216 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 25, House Resolution 216, resolved that at any time after the adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill H.R. 1062 to improve the consideration by the Securities and Exchange Commission of the costs and benefits of its regulations and orders. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. It shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 113-10. That amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. All points of order against that amendment in the nature of a substitute are waived. No amendment to that amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order, except those printed in the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for a division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments as may have been adopted. Any member may demand a separate vote in the House on any amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole to the bill, or to the amendment in the nature of a substitute made in order as original text. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion, except one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. For the purpose of the debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to my friend, the gentleman from Worcester, Massachusetts, the gentleman, Mr. McGovern, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During consideration of this resolution, all time is yielded for the purpose of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
House Resolution 216 provides a structured rule for consideration of H.R. 1062. This rule provides for discussion and opportunities for every single member of the majority and the minority to participate in this debate. We make an order every single germane amendment that was submitted to the Rules Committee on this issue. Mr. Speaker, the legislation before us today is really quite simple. It is a common sense solution to preventing unnecessary and overly burdensome government regulation, or perhaps an opportunity to understand why the government might be perpetrating a rule that would impact our free enterprise system. It requires the SEC to perform cost-benefit analysis before finalizing any major rule. It also prevents the implementation of the rule if the benefits do not outweigh the costs. Throughout this bill, the American taxpayer will be protected from needless regulations that would impede economic growth without providing effective consumer protections. In other words, Mr. Speaker, we're here to ensure that the SEC provides balance with the rules and regulations that are on a major context when it issues these rules on the marketplace. In January of 2011, President Obama signed an executive order directing all non-independent agencies, such as the Department of Energy, the Department of Education, and others, to abide by the same rules that we are providing for today in H.R. 1062. However, because it is an independent agency, the SEC is not required to follow the President's rules. The legislation before us today creates parity, an opportunity for Congress to work with an agency and other non-independent agencies on a better way for them to promulgate the rules that they do and show a balance in the marketplace, just like the President asked other government agencies to do. Furthermore, This legislation in no way weakens consumer protections or reduces accountability in the financial services industry. To the contrary, this proposal ensures that regulations issued by the SEC are effective and based upon sound policy. Consumers and businesses alike will benefit from a reformed regulatory process. So I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this rule and yes on the underlying legislation, and I reserve my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the distinguished chairman of the Rules Committee, my friend Mr. Sessions, for yielding me the customary 30 minutes. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection, and the gentleman is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Mr. Speaker, here we go again. Another day in the House where we're not focused on jobs, where we're not focused on healing our ailing economy, where we're not focused on the needs of the American people. Yesterday, for the 37th time in 2.5 years, this House passed a bill overturning the Affordable Health Care Act. For the 37th time, my Republican friends decided to take up time on this House floor supporting a meaningless, partisan bill to overturn a law that will dramatically improve the health care of millions of Americans and is already helping to lower our deficit. Perhaps one day they will wake up from their Tea Party fever dream and move on to more important priorities. Not only have they wasted time debating a bill that won't be considered in the Senate, let alone signed into law, they are willfully ignoring the budget process that they were so stridently defending just a few months ago. It's been 55 days since the Senate passed its budget resolution, yet the Republicans refuse to go to conference to finish their work. This is the same Republican Party that passed a bill that says members of Congress cannot be paid if we don't produce a budget. Let me repeat, no budget, no pay. Yet the Republicans refuse to finish the budget. All this flip-flopping is giving me whiplash, Mr. Speaker. And today we're presented with the bill along with a whopping 3 amendments made in order. So much for an open process. Whatever happened to open rules? So let's take a look at today's bill. It's a bill that would require the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, to conduct even more extensive cost-benefit analyses than it already does when proposing any rule or when issuing interpretive guidance. Who could be against cost-benefit analysis? That seems like a common-sense idea, one that has merit and should be considered by agencies. Well, Mr. Speaker, here's where the devil is really in the details. The SEC already does cost-benefit analyses on these rules and regulations. It is already happening. So what's the real purpose of this bill? Is there a problem with the way the SEC is handling these cost-benefit analyses? Mr. Speaker, this bill is really about putting more burdens on the SEC as they are attempting to fulfill their mandates under Dodd-Frank and do their job to protect investors. This bill places additional burdens on the SEC to meet these new requirements, and I'd like to point out, without providing any additional budget resources. The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates that this bill will cost the SEC $23 million over 5 years and will require the hiring of 20 additional staff. This is while sequestration is causing the federal government to shrink and for agencies to furlough staff. In fact, right now, sequestration is actually preventing the SEC from hiring any more additional staff, the same additional staff that would be needed to implement this bill if it were ever to become law. I can only presume that the authors of this bill are attempting to bog the SEC down with additional, unnecessary, and redundant mandates in order to prevent the SEC from doing its job of protecting investors. This bill actually steers the SEC's work toward minimizing costs to big businesses and investment banks. I mean, that's what this does. How is that protecting the individual investor? For the life of me, I cannot understand why the Republican leadership wants to undermine the efforts of this agency to protect the individual investor. We're coming out of an historic recession, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. A big reason for the recession was the recklessness of investment banks and financial institutions. Millions of Americans lost money they had put into the stock market and entrusted to banks and financial institutions because of these institutions' reckless actions. We're talking about college savings, retirement accounts, and other nest eggs. Yet the Republican leadership would rather take the side of these reckless financial institutions that brought financial and economic ruin to our nation, our communities, and our families, than stand up and fight for the individual investor, the little guy. They'd rather fight for Wall Street than stand up for Main Street. Mr. Speaker, that's not the right thing to do. We should pass a budget instead. We should pass the Van Hollen sequestration replacement bill. We should pass a jobs bill. But we should not be wasting our time on a bill that will punish individual investors in order to protect big banks. Mr. Speaker, I would urge my colleagues to vote no on the rule, and I would urge my colleagues to vote no on the underlying bill, and I would urge my Republican friends to, sometime soon, take up some legislation that's going to help put America back to work and get our economy back on the right track. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and I appreciate my friend, the gentleman who brings up many good points about jobs, job creation, the ability for this Congress to be able to effectively hear from the American people about the issues and ideas that they're facing, come to resolution in this body, work with our friends in the Senate, and to get legislation to the President of the United States. And I think that should be and has been what our goal is about. And it should be our goal also to find common ground. What's interesting is that this piece of legislation that we're handling now actually went to the Banking Committee, Financial Services Committee, as an agreement we more or less thought that would be a suspension item. In other words, a piece of legislation that there was widespread agreement on that it would be good to put in the rules as one of a group of pieces of legislation. This would be a good idea to have the SEC to accept this as part of what they do when they issue a rule. Now what's happened is it's turned into a larger fight as a result of us wanting to simply make sure that the rules that apply to other federal agencies also apply to independent agencies. So we thought we were doing the right thing to come and work together. Now, if we want to talk about, and it's fair, I guess I assume, to do that, even though we're trying to talk about this rule today for this, if we want to talk about the budget and things that are presently being evolved, then we need to listen to our Democrat friends about the budget. They're not happy because we passed in this House an opportunity to have a budget that in the next 10 years would balance. A balanced budget. The gentleman Paul Ryan, the chairman of the Budget Committee, came up to the Rules Committee and he spoke about how this president, every single year that Barack Obama is president, with the help of former Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, raised spending, put rules and regulations on the American people that is causing the lowest level of job creation that we've had in over 40 years. $1 trillion deficit every single year. And even with this massive tax increase that was a signing bonus for the president that took place in December, we still are going to run $1 trillion deficit. So what my friends, the Democrats, said upstairs in the Rules Committee, what they're for is raising spending another $1 trillion and raising taxes another $1 trillion. Mr. Speaker, I do understand there's widespread disagreement. There is widespread disagreement when our friends that control the Senate, the Democrats, want to do the exact same thing in their body to this country. raising spending another $1 trillion, raising taxes another $1 trillion. So they make a good point. Why won't we appoint conferees? Well, Speaker Pelosi, back in 2009, took more than 2 months to do the exact same thing that they want us to do. What is occurring is that our chairman, Paul Ryan, is working with their chairman on the agreement of how they would go about doing their job of having a conference on the budget. Because you see, when you start so far apart of trying to balance the budget, trying to not put more rules and regulations and taxes on the American people to where they stand a better chance, not only of taking care of their own families and providing for their children to go to college and to be able to pay for it, and to take care of their lifetime needs when they retire, that requires a basic sense of simply agreeing with what people are trying to do versus having the government come and provide a government-run health care system, having the government provide student loans, having the government expand government and take care of people endlessly. And so there's two different visions. One of raising taxes $1 trillion, raising spending $1 trillion, which is what the Democrats want to do, versus trying to balance our budget, work our way out of problems, grow our economy, jobs, job creation, and investment. That's what we're trying to do, and that's what Republicans talked about last month. That's why we came forth with a budget when the Senate hadn't even done a budget under Democrat leadership for 4 years. That's why we are leaders in Washington. Republicans are leaders in the House of Representatives. We maintain the control. We follow the order and listen to the American people of trying to make their lives better, not grow a government that will be out of control like an attorney general who, upon taking the oath of office, then decides when and when he does not want to make decisions and whether he recuses himself, or whether you have an IRS that's out of control and in people's lives and making decisions that are politically based. Mr. Speaker, this is the reason why we need a government that is smaller, more efficient, and does not have time or the inclination to become all things to all people and to tell the American people what they will do and control our lives. That's why we're here today. And, Mr. Speaker, I couldn't be happier than to say, and today we're on the floor trying to talk about what we thought was an idea that would be accepted by every single person in this body of a great idea. I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm a little bit confused. The gentleman from Texas says he wants a smaller government, yet the bill that he's proposing here that we discuss on the floor actually will cost the American taxpayers more. CBO says we need an additional $23 million for this additional bureaucracy that the gentleman has embraced. We're going to need to hire 20 new employees, according to CBO, in order to meet these new requirements. So if you want a smaller government, here we are expanding government, but they're expanding government in a way that will hurt the little guy and protect Wall Street, which is to be expected. Just one thing I want to say to make clear to my colleagues, so in case anybody's kind of a little bit confused here as well on the issue of the process. The way the process is supposed to work when it comes to the budget, we pass a budget in the House, Senate passes a budget in the Senate, then you go to conference and you work out the differences, and guess what? In the conference, you don't get everything you want, and we don't get everything we want, especially when there's a divided government the way it is right now. Compromise is something that has to take place. And so I would just take issue with the gentleman when he says that Republicans are leaders. Republicans aren't leaders. Republicans are obstructionists. You're holding everything up. We're doing meaningless soundbite, press release legislation day in and day out. not helping put one more person back to work, not alleviating any of the difficulties that the middle class are dealing with right now. My friends are obstructing everything. They're holding things up. They're delaying the economic recovery. It is unconscionable that we are on the floor doing things that are going nowhere and that are helping no one. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlewoman from California, the ranking member of the Committee on Financial Services, Ms. Waters.
From California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGovern. I thank you so very much for aptly describing what is happening on the floor today relative to the SEC. Since its passage, Republicans have introduced dozens upon dozens of bills to undermine, repeal, or otherwise dismantle Dodd-Frank. And a prime example of that is what they're doing on this whole issue of cost-benefit analysis. We're going to have on the floor today a bill that is going to pile more requirements on top of the SEC for economic analysis. We're going to have a bill whose real aim is to bog down the SEC so that they won't be able to do their work, so that they won't be able to do their rulemaking, so that they won't be able to protect investors. This is absolutely unconscionable. I can understand that there's a lot of disagreement with Dodd-Frank. I can understand that there are those on the opposite side of the aisle who are concerned about protecting the markets and not necessarily the investors, but to come up with the kind of obstruction that we're seeing, not only legislatively, but going so far as to team up with their friends and go into court, as they have done on proxy access, and get a ruling against proxy access so that they can basically have this bill come to the floor today where they put requirement on top of requirement, costing more money, as Mr. McGovern has said, costing more time, and diverting the attention away from the work that the SEC should be doing. I am particularly concerned about the Jobs Act, the Jobs Bill. Yes, on the Jobs Bill, we have a bipartisan effort, and many Democrats joined up with Republicans on this bill, even though there were some concerns about it, so that we could try and see if we could use a new approach to creating jobs. But that's going to get delayed because now they're attacking the SEC. I yield back the balance of my time.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, I think it's very interesting that they're trying to argue that we're trying to get in the way of the SEC, and yet the SEC, in their rules and regulations, have put an impact of small business of $1.75 trillion. Mr. Speaker, what we're trying to do is apply the same principles and ideas that President Obama had to an agency that spends their life doing rules and regulations. And to say that doing their job correctly with a balance is something that we shouldn't require them to do is a silly argument. That's like saying that Republicans and sequestration, and when it was a President Obama idea, it is the President's idea. Sequestration, he's the one that proposed it. We're the ones that simply took him up on his idea, and he signed it into law. They're arguing with themselves about the things which are good. Once again, the President initiated sequestration. We worked with the President as a backstop. There we are. The President issues this same ruling, same asking agencies to please make sure they include cost-benefit analysis, but don't apply it later to someone who spends their life doing rules and regulations. Mr. Speaker, it's an amazing world that we live in. We thought, the chairman of the Financial Services Committee, Jeb Hensarling, after testimony in meetings, in feedback, thought the SEC actually agreed with this. We simply put it as something they ought to be doing on a regular basis. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have right now a gentleman from the committee who has spent time and heard the testimony and understands that this should be a piece of legislation that we all agree with because it's common sense. I would like to yield to the gentleman from North Carolina, member of the Financial Services. 6 minutes to the gentleman, Mr. McHenry.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This debate is actually really absolutely bizarre. President Obama asked for a cost-benefit analysis for independent regulatory agencies in an executive order. It's absolutely bizarre because the chairman of the SEC, then Mary Shapiro, committed in writing to Congressman Garrett and I and Congressman Issa, committed in writing to a cost-benefit analysis. Chairman Shapiro, even in September of 2011, agreed to a retrospective review of offering and reporting requirements and posting this on a, quote, web page seeking public input. So the complaints from the other side of the aisle seem absolutely bizarre because we have commitments. What we're trying to do is codify in law what was a process a former chairman of the SEC committed to. We want to make sure that this is not ad hoc, that it goes forward, that it's in the statute, that it's clear. And why are we doing this? Well, we've heard from the other side of the aisle that we need to focus on investor protection. There's the other part of the SEC, which is supposed to foster capital formation. Now, what is capital formation? Capital formation is the capacity, the ability of a business to get the monies they need to grow and employ more people and to offer more products or more services. It's the monies a business needs, the investors a business needs, in order to grow and help get this economy moving. I thought that's what we're all about. We hear speech after speech from the President, that's what he's all about, but we hear from the other side of the aisle that they don't like this approach because they're not focused on that, which is unfortunate. The reason why we're putting this in statute is that the SEC too often just puts rules into place without consideration of the cost. And when they do that, their process has never been formalized until the last 2 years of actually weighing both the costs and benefits of a rule. They simply say there are benefits. Well, we all know, and I hope the other side of the aisle would admit, that there is a cost to regulation. Now, I would hope they would admit that. Now, I'll give you an example. Regulation A, which is the ability of small businesses to get capital from the public markets. The Regulation A, in 1998, you had 57 offerings through Regulation A. I mean, 58 businesses getting money from outside investors through this regulation. This is for the smaller sized businesses. By 2001, you only had one take advantage of this Regulation A to get monies for their small and medium-sized businesses. Well, what happened? The market changed, but the SEC, because they were not obligated to, did not review their rules. They did not update their rules. They did not think about the cost of cutting off capital to small businesses that absolutely desperately need this, mainly because of the changing nature of the economy and the impact of the awful Dodd-Frank Act that has imposed enormous cost burdens on banks, and so we have less bank lending, so businesses need a different opportunity to get money. So what we're putting in place is a 5-year review of those rules so that the SEC is forced to weigh both the costs and benefits of these regulations, and we can get this economy moving again and capital flowing again. That's what it's really all about. That's not a great deal of fuss, but you know, we have folks on the other side of the aisle that simply want to make a fuss about that, which is unfortunate. We need to be focused on capital formation. We need to be focused on making sure that we foster regulations and review regulations so that we can get this economy moving again. That's what this is all about. I would say to my colleague on the other side of the aisle who raised the question of the cost of this, what this cost comes from is what the SEC says, right? That it's going to cost us additional money to review these regulations, implicitly saying that they have regulations on the books that they don't review, that they don't look back on a regular basis and see if they actually fit to the modern marketplace. And we have rules on the books that have been on the books for over 80 years. So I think it's high time we force the SEC to do something that is responsible, that is right, and that even this President has called for. And I hope the folks on the other side of the aisle would join us in making sure that we have this bill pass on a unanimous basis. And with that, I'd also encourage us to pass this rule. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, talk about bizarre. The notion that a bill comes to the floor that CBO, the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, says is going to cost $23 billion. There will be a need for additional employees, and there's nothing in this bill that will cover those costs. And on top of that, my friends who, by the way, who embraced sequestration, that's your plan, I would say to my colleague from Texas. That's not the President's plan. It was the members of this House, led by the majority here, that voted for it. And everybody who doesn't like it over there, guess what? You're in charge. Fix it. Bring something to the floor, fix it. Mr. Van Hollen has an alternative. You won't even let us bring it to the floor. So don't complain about something that you supported and you voted for, and now you don't want to fix. And just one other thing, I want to make it clear to my colleagues, this isn't about protecting small businesses. This is about protecting Wall Street, big banks, big financial institutions. I get it, you know, that's nothing new coming from the other side of the aisle, but that's what this is about. And at this point, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 5 minutes to the gentlewoman from New York, the distinguished ranking member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Slaughter.
The gentlelady from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding me the time. With today's legislation, the majority is putting the interest of Wall Street once again before the welfare of the American people. Unfortunately, the majority's desire to give a helping hand to Wall Street is nothing new. In addition to today's legislation, the majority has repeatedly provided favors to a shadowy arm of Wall Street known as political intelligence industry. Over the last few weeks, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal have all reported on a suspicious surge in stock prices caused by operatives in the political intelligence industry. On April 1st, the political intelligence consultant sent an email to selected investors announcing a pending change in government policy that would benefit health insurance companies. Shortly after that email was sent, actually 18 minutes before the stock market closed that day, stocks in 3 major health insurance companies skyrocketed by, hold the phone, $660 million. In 18 minutes before the close of trading that day, 3 health industries got investments of $660 million. And that occurred 30 minutes before the government announced its decision. Now, earlier this week, we learned that the political intelligence consultant sent a subsequent email boasting to his lobbyist friend, "Did you see what I did to the stock market in the final 30 minutes of trading? I still want to buy you a drink," end quote. Now, this is exactly the kind of questionable case that I've been fighting for 7 years, and we finally got the Stock Act. But my point this morning is that the SEC has launched an investigation into this matter. There would be no cost-benefit whatever to having the SEC stop looking into this bill and what happened to the stock market that day because of political intelligence, so they can look back over ancient laws. There would be no cost-benefit to having the SEC so tied up with that they cannot regulate that which they are supposed to regulate, and had they done a better job. The recent financial disaster that cost us an awful lot and would have been a great benefit to stop was not caught in time. The political intelligence industry walks the halls of Congress every day looking to privately profit from the public trust. But however, unlike lobbyists, there are no regulations to ensure they adhere to any ethical standard of behavior. Months before I produced the Stock Act in 2006, there were suspicious Wall Street trades occurring immediately prior to the Senate Majority Leader announcing an important vote on asbestos liability legislation. It soon became apparent that non-public information regarding the legislation had been used to enrich stockholders, and the political intelligence industry was at the heart of the case. We had a lonely battle, those of us, there were 7 of us, for 3 terms that co-sponsored the bill. But in 2011, a television program called 60 Minutes did an expose on insider trading by Congress, and overnight, just about, well, maybe by the end of the week, let's say, we had 286 co-sponsors in the House, including 99 Republican co-sponsors. As the bill gained popularity, I was promised a markup in the Financial Services Committee, but it was canceled, pulled out from under the chair. In the Senate, Senator Grassley joined our cause, and when Senator Lieberman took it out of the Senate bill, Senator Grassley had an amendment that passed the Senate, putting political intelligence back into the Stock Act. However, it still had to come back to the House. And miraculously, political intelligence was removed once more to benefit Wall Street, was put on suspension calendar, completely unamendable. I could do nothing about it. It is very painful for me, at least I've been paying attention here, to what I've seen happening since. So I promise you that we will come back again with it, but as I said, I'm pleased that the SEC is investigating this most recent case. 2 days ago, I tried to do an amendment on this particular bill to see if we could bring political intelligence back. And it would have helped the SEC build the insider trading investigations, but the majority in the Rules Committee rejected my amendment, and we go on today, as usual, without it. We also go on today with a bill that's never going to go in the Senate. As I pointed out yesterday on our 38th try to repeal Medicare, health care bill, that cost us $54 million on that particular bill alone in every time that we have tried to repeal it. $54 million has been spent to try to repeal Medicare. May I have 30 seconds more?
The gentlelady an additional minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 additional minute.
CBS had said it cost about $25 million to run the House. I really would like to find out how much House time we've taken up and how many millions of dollars we've spent since this term started with bills like this, one House bills that we know the Senate will never take up, will never become law, and if by some fluke they should, the President tells us that he will veto them over and over and over again. I could be mistaken with 1 or 2 things, but to my recollection, the best of my recollection, the only thing we've done here this term that actually got some action in both houses was when we changed the FAA policy under sequestration. And I joined my friend Mr. McGovern to say what we should have done is do away with sequestration. Maybe the freshmen who wanted to vote again to repeal the health care bill might have gotten some joy out of lifting sequestration and letting cancer patients again get their treatments and children go to Head Start. I'd like to try to do it that way. Talk about cost benefit, that's a benefit. If we really want to work about how much it costs and what we get from it, nothing could prove that better than to lift sequestration. Yield back.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. The gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. In order to balance out the time, I'm going to reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend from Massachusetts. I got to say, listening to my friends on the other side of the aisle, they give revisionist history a bad name. They want us all to somehow forget how the recession began and on whose watch. It began under George W. Bush, not Barack Obama. It ended under Barack Obama. My friend from Texas talks about the job loss. That was on George W. Bush's watch when we were almost losing 700,000 jobs a month. On average, this year, we've been creating 208,000 jobs a month, and it would be more, but for the Republican gutting of public sector investment that's already cost us 600,000 jobs and shaved a full point off unemployment. In other words, unemployment would be 1 point lower than it is today, but for their efforts. They want you to forget the Wall Street meltdown that required TARP on their watch, And now they decry Dodd-Frank as if it caused the meltdown, that it is this hobnail boot on the jugular of the poor banking community and investment community in Wall Street, which, if removed, would unleash unparalleled economic activity. The consumer and the investor, not so much. Let's call this bill what it is, a naked attempt to undermine the investor and consumer protections of Dodd-Frank and tilt the table once again in the favor of Wall Street at the direct expense of Main Street investors. This bill would render what should be the SEC's primary focus, investor protection, an ephemeral objective at best. Why else would this bill codify some of the best practices of the executive order, but then conveniently omit any assessment of the benefits accrued by greater investor protection? They want you to believe the narrative that regulation only involves costs. But regulation also includes benefits to protect investors, to protect homeowners, to protect senior citizens. That's why AARP has expressed concern about this bill. That's why we should defeat the rule.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, what we're trying to do is to put it in writing exactly what the gentleman talked about. Why are they promulgating the rule? What effects would their rule have? And why what they do makes sense and is in a balanced way? That's what we're trying to do here today. Makes sense to me. Wish it made sense to more people in this body. We preserve our time.
Reserves his time. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, let me just say that what I think what's going on here is basically that my Republican friends are trying to expand the bureaucracy, potentially charge the American taxpayers $23 million, but they're not going to provide the money, and so they're just going to bog down an agency that is designed to protect investors and consumers. And I think that's the game here. I mean, this is about protecting big banks and Wall Street and big financial institutions, and it's the same old, same old. This is nothing new for those who have been following the agenda of the House Republicans. And so, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to urge that we defeat the previous question, and if we defeat the previous question, I will offer an amendment to the rule to bring up H.Res. 174, Representative Chris Van Hollen's resolution telling the Speaker to appoint conferees to negotiate a compromise budget agreement with the Senate. It has been 55 days since the Senate passed the budget. My Republican friends made a big deal about the fact that we shouldn't be paid unless we pass a budget. House has passed the budget, Senate's passed the budget, but my Republican friends don't want to go to conference because they don't believe in compromise. So, to discuss the importance of starting the budget negotiations with the Senate, I yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, the ranking member of the Budget Committee, Mr. Van Hollen.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend from Massachusetts. There's been a lot of talk on the floor this morning about the sequester and the negative impact it's having on the economy. I would remind my colleagues, as my friend from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, did, that on 4 occasions the House Democrats have tried to bring to this floor for a vote a bill that would replace the sequester, end the disruption, and end the job loss that the Congressional Budget Office says is coming with the sequester. And this morning, we're going to ask this House to take a simple vote on another resolution. And I'm going to read it because it's really simple. It says, resolve that it is the sense of the House of Representatives that the Speaker should follow regular House procedure and immediately request a conference and appoint conferees to negotiate a fiscal year 2014 budget resolution agreement with the United States Senate. Now, we all stood on this floor and heard our Republican colleagues criticize the United States Senate for 3 years because they did not have a budget. Well, guess what? The United States Senate passed a budget more than 53 days ago, but now what's happened is the Speaker of this House has refused to go to conference to negotiate a final budget. We heard for weeks and weeks the mantra, no budget, no pay. Apparently that was a meaningless cry, because as of right now there is no federal budget, and members of the House and the Senate are still getting paid. Did you mean it, or did you not mean it? Now, we heard complaints about how the President's budget was late this year. Guess what, Mr. Speaker? We are now way overdue in getting a resolution out of conference committee. If you look at the statute, the law on the budget, it says the House and Senate are supposed to have completed conference action by April 15th. We're way overdue. And the only reason we're overdue is because this House and the Speaker of this House refuses to appoint conferees. Now, the Senate Democrats on 8 occasions, Mr. Speaker, have asked for unanimous consent in the Senate to go to conference. And they've been blocked over there. It's getting to be a little embarrassing to some of the Republican senators. I just want to show you a quote from Senator McCain just the other day, quoting Senator McCain, "I think it's insane for Republicans who complained for 4 years about Harry Reid not having a budget, and now we're not going to agree to conferees. That is beyond comprehension for me," unquote, Senator McCain. And guess what, Mr. Speaker? This is getting to be beyond comprehension to the American people, saying one thing and doing another. Here's some other Republican senators. Senator Bosman, "I think we need to go to conference." Senator Wicker, "I would say by the end of next week," that's this coming week, "we probably should be ready to go to conference." Senator Coburn, "I'm okay with going right now," and on and on. You would think our House Republican colleagues would begin to feel a little bit sense of that embarrassment as well, given the fact that they called for years to get a budget done and now are standing in the way of getting that exact budget done. In fact, the Speaker of this House on multiple occasions has said we should go to conference on the budget, that that's how we resolve things in the regular order. Here's what the Speaker said on Meet the Press back in March when we were all putting together our budgets. The Senate was putting together a budget and the House was putting together a budget. Here's what the Speaker said: "It's time for us to get back to regular order here in Congress. When the House passes a bill, the Senate passes a bill, and if we disagree, we go to conference to resolve those differences." And the Speaker has said this on multiple occasions. So I just want to read again from the resolution I'm asking this House to vote on this morning. It says simply, resolved, that is the sense of the House, that the Speaker should follow regular House procedure and appoint the conferees that he told the country on national television he would do in order to make sure that we get on with the fundamental business of this country and pass a federal budget, not just a House budget, not just a Senate budget. Those things are meaningless by themselves. You got to get a federal budget. So it turns out that this no budget, no pay thing was really just a kind of wink, wink, knowing, hey, the House can pass the budget, Senate passes the budget, but it doesn't actually get the job done. So, Mr. Speaker, I just ask, let us have a vote to appoint conferees to get on with the nation's business. I thank you, and yield back my time.
The gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. You know, we've turned this debate into some really common sense ideas, and that is that we ought to have a budget, which is what Republicans have said for years. I have no doubt in my mind that when Chairman Paul Ryan of the House Budget Committee, when he is ready, when he feels like that they have worked out an understanding with the chairman.
Would the gentleman yield on that point?
I would.